Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. My name is Jake Cunningham. I work here in the CTL as a graphic designer. And today we're going to talk about accessible, how to make your courses, flyers, really anything. It's kind of universal. This isn't necessarily tailored to one specific type of content. And the goal for this workshop is specifically to both give you tips, ways you can make it more accessible, and help explain why these things are accessible and what it's like for people who have disabilities to how they experience their education. So I'm going to start off just by introducing myself a bit more and my background to this. I myself am disabled. I have autism, ADHD, and panic disorder, which gives me frequent panic attacks. And additionally, though it's not related to the others, I do have color blindness as well. So a lot of this I will be speaking from my experience as a student here at EMCC, but also talk about some things that I don't necessarily have, but I will do my best to relate what it's like for other people. So let's get started. First thing I want to talk about is dyslexia. Now, dyslexia is specifically a difference in, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention this. If you have questions, just blurt them out because I may not notice otherwise. So yeah, dyslexia, it's a difference in the way the brain actually processes the language, specifically in how it associates words and mental images. It's difficulty decoding phonemes, which are like the very specific parts of language that make up individual sounds, like t, stuff like that. And the big issue with dyslexia is that it makes reading very difficult. It takes a lot of energy. Imagine trying to do like a really hard math problem. That's like the level of energy it takes. And when you think about the amount of reading that is required for almost all college courses, especially things in English or science, that can make just getting through this very time consuming and very exhausting. Some people do experience like visual distortions, though this is rarer. Some people describe shimmering or that it seems like the words themselves are kind of shifting or slightly moving, but that's a minority of people. Most people just have difficulty connecting words, meaning, and phonemes. And there is a dyslexia simulation I would like to show you since I don't actually have it. Now, this isn't actually what it looks like to have dyslexia, but what it is trying to do is simulate the difficulty that it takes to read, right? So as you can see, some of it looks familiar, but not always. And if you're dealing with new words, specifically, like new vocab, for example, in like a biology class, if you don't already know those words, it's going to be even harder to actually figure out what it's trying to say. So that is my bit on dyslexia, and I'll go in later into more detail on what you can do to make it easier for people with dyslexia to get through your courses. But for now, I'm just going to go through the next bit, which is autism. Now, I myself am autistic, and autism is a huge spectrum, right? It's a bunch of co-occurring characteristics, and not everybody with autism has all of these. The main ones are going to be like an intense interest in certain hobbies or activities. Like, for example, I could talk all day about music. I love music. I listen to it all the time to like a very intense degree. Autism makes it take a bit longer to process information. And of course, this varies as well. Difficulties with social interaction and or communication. A good example of this is using metaphorical language. Like some people with autism will take things very literally. So using, like I'm so hungry I could eat a horse might confuse someone with autism. And as with all disabilities, the more you live with it, you kind of build up mechanisms. So whereas more literal things in the past may have confused me as they're said more and more, you kind of have to figure out what things are metaphoric, which ones are not. Differences in sensory processing. This is a big one for me specifically, in that I experience senses louder and more intensely than most people, and I have difficulty blocking out background noise. Like, I have been brought to tears before by like a faulty computer fan that was making a bunch of noise because it was just so stressful, and I couldn't get away from it because, I have to work at a computer. It also includes difficulty starting, stopping, and switching tasks. People can tend to hyperfocus, which I'll go into more detail about in the next bit on ADHD. There's a very strong preference for predictability and routine, and often there are people with autism get very upset when there's a change in what is expected. And there are many common comorbidities. People with autism are more likely to have depression, anxiety, learning challenges, and many other things. Oh, ADHD, that's another big one that's more common with autism. And I want to elaborate a bit more on how everybody is different. I have a friend who, like me, has autism. For me, I do pretty good with social interaction. I still have challenges, more so than most people, but I am able to interact with people pretty easily. And I have horrible issues with sensory processing. Like, I just don't deal with sound well, and it can cause me to have panic attacks. On my friend, on the other hand, is very difficult with social interactions. He often doesn't understand cues, social cues, and he has a difficult time like fitting in because of the differences in how he behaves. But he doesn't really experience sensory processing issues. He loves loud noises, right? Like, we went to Barrett-Jackson, the car show, and every time there was like a loud engine roar, I would like try to get away as far as possible, and he would try to get away as close as possible. Now, those are two very different reactions, but we both still have autism because we both struggle with managing stress, which is a big one, managing stress and anxiety. And we get overwhelmed very easily. So when I was a student here, deadlines are a big thing that bring a lot of stress. And you get in this cycle where, there's more deadlines, and the less clear things are, the harder it is, the more effort it takes, right? And it can just lead to fatigue, dealing with disabilities on top of the already difficult process of going to school and working and, managing life. Next is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a form of executive dysfunction. So it's not just you get sidetracked easily, though that is a big part of it. I get sidetracked constantly, and often in the middle of speaking, I will forget what I'm saying. But on top of that, it also comes with difficulty with time management, difficulty planning things, difficulty starting and stopping tasks, which it shares with autism, regulating emotions, which it also shares with autism, and difficulty maintaining attention. But some of the pros are that you can really hyper-focus on tasks, which are enjoyable, right? So if I'm not enjoying something, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to focus. But if I am loving what I'm doing, I can just do it for hours and I will forget. The whole world around me will fade out. But that's very rare. It's very rare that something like happens. And also the inability to block out background noises. The other thing I want to talk about with regard to ADHD and autism is what's called like a shutdown, right? If there's too much sensory information or you get too overwhelmed, and this can happen in people who aren't ADHD or autistic, but it can lead to what's called a shutdown, where you just can't process any new information. Like, people will talk to me, and if I'm in that shutdown mode, I will hear you, I will recognize you're speaking to me, but I can't parse information from it. I can't think, and you just kind of have to calm down. And so, for example, I've taken many art classes here, and one of those classes, we had to tone paper, which if you don't know is where you rub basically graphite powder. Think of like a pencil really crushed up on paper. And so all these people, this constant grinding, rubbing noise of paper on paper, like almost brought me to a panic attack. I had to leave the class. And that made that very difficult for me to engage with that. And so there, I'm going to stop there for now. I'll get into color blindness and visual disabilities a bit later. But now let's talk about what you can do to help. So when you're making text, which we use text all the time, bold words for emphasis. When you're bolding words, it's the clearest way to emphasize stuff. Italics specifically make text harder to read, especially at smaller sizes for people who have dyslexia or cataracts or are visually impaired. The tilted letters just make it very difficult for those people. Now, italics, you can still use them when they're required by like MLA or APA citations. But when you're emphasizing text, don't use it. Don't use color to emphasize text because people like me who are colorblind might not notice it. I've been in classes where text is emphasized with like a dark red color that was near indistinguishable from black for me. And I didn't notice, and I was like, wait, is that red? And then, I had to really zoom in because the more of a color I have, the easier it is to distinguish. When underlining text, it can make characters with descenders. So think lowercase y, lowercase g, lowercase j. It can make those letters much harder to read because now there's a line through it. So use bold to emphasize stuff, and you can use color to emphasize, but make sure it's not the only way you can tell that text is emphasized. Make sure font is at least like a 12-point minimum, and this will change every font, but 12-point is a good minimum to go with. Often larger is better, just because the smaller text is, the harder it is to read. Line spacing, set it from 1.15 to 1.5. The further apart text is, the easier it is to read. Avoid all caps. The mix of lowercase and uppercase letters makes it easier to distinguish different letters. Whereas since capital letters all have the same height, it becomes much more difficult to actually distinguish letter forms. And it can come across as like yelling, and be consistent. Use the same type of emphasis throughout all your content, right? That way, when there's bold, they know what it means. They don't have to figure out, oh, there's bold here, but here it's italicized and colored, right? That will just make it more difficult to figure out what you mean when emphasizing it. And try to stick to 1 to 2 fonts because different fonts provide different levels of readability. And it's, hey, speaking of ADHD, there we go. I just forgot what I was saying in the middle of work. That's another thing I deal with. But 1 or 2 fonts. There should be one font for like headers, titles, stuff like that, and then a different font for like body text. And center text can be hard to read because it's more difficult to find the next line when each line starts at a different point. So keep everything to the left like you see on this slide, because that way when they get to one line, they can just go to the same place every time. And that really helps people with dyslexia. So next, let's talk about fonts. There's 3 main font types: serif, sans serif, and decorative. Now, the serifs are those little things that kind of stick off the bottom or different parts of the letters. And those, especially at smaller sizes, can make it harder to read. So when possible, which most of the time it is possible, always go with sans serif. It's just easier to read, it's cleaner, and at smaller sizes, it just displays better on mobile devices. Almost always avoid decorative fonts. They're usually like handwritten or they look very, stylized. Those can be very hard to read for people with visual disabilities. So, and I will talk about fonts, by the way. I forgot to leave. This is Times New Roman, right? It's very common, but it's not a readable font. And when it's not blown up, the letters are very close together. This here is Open Sans, and I highly recommend the use of Open Sans. It's like the recommended font by EMCC in terms of our branding, but it's also just a very readable, clean font that was designed specifically for legibility. And let's talk about legibility. Legibility specifically is how distinguishable individual characters and words are from each other, right? So in here we have this font Impact, which is not a legible font. As you can see, lowercase L, I are very different. Often one can be the same as those. Like these are the exact same. 0, capital O, lowercase o, harder to distinguish. Over here, you can see each of these very common characters are all like very different, right? Even if it's like a slight height, that still goes a long way in making things easier to read. So this, once again, is Open Sans, the font I recommend. Another good one is like Vidana. Calibri is another good one. Those are all very legible sans serifs. And then readability refers specifically how easy text is to read as a whole, right? This here, it's close together, it's small, it's a serif. This isn't very readable. This, on the other hand, is readable. There's a lot of space, it's larger, and even the space in between the individual letters is larger too. So it just makes it easier as a whole to read. Let's talk about links. So when you're making a link, there are ways to do it and ways not to do it. Avoid using the full URL, right? When you're using a full URL, often it's a string of numbers and letters that doesn't really tell you much about where it leads. It's computer code designed to let your computer know where to go. And for example, if you're using a screen reader, it will read out the entirety of the link. So instead of something telling you where it's taking you, describing you what you're clicking on, it'll be like https://www.maricopa. Like it takes a long time and it's often not descriptive. So you want to be descriptive. It also helps, for example, let's say someone is working in a public place, right? Like at a coffee shop with internet or whatever, right? If you tell them like this is a video, they know that they're not going to click on a link and immediately there's going to be noise, right, in a public place. They know what they're going to. And it also just makes it easier to find what you're looking for if you're coming back to find a link when reviewing content like a slideshow or a Canvas page. Avoid linking text with stuff that just says click here, because that doesn't describe what it's doing. Now, you can use the full URL if it's short and descriptive, like maricopa.edu, right? That tells you exactly where it is. Now, if it's going to a very specific page with like /events, /this, /that, then don't use it, right? Only if it's like a very simple thing that tells you exactly where it's going in the URL. URLs are still okay to use in research citations because those are necessary, that's required that way. So examples here, we have bad links. It's just a link to learn more about frog life cycles. Click here, another bad link. So these don't really tell you where they take you. A good example would be for a better understanding of a frog's life cycle, read the life cycle of frog, an article published by yada, 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 right? And it doesn't even always have to be this specific, but here, this tells you what it is. It's an article, so you know you're going to be reading it, you know what you're going to get out of it to understand the life cycle. And it even tells you who published it, which isn't always necessary, but it's a good touch. Now, if you're listing out things, like for example, in a glossary, or you have a resources section that just has a bunch of different listed articles, videos, this way it'll tell you what the name is, and then it'll tell you what it is. That way you don't have to write out an entire thing for every single thing on the list. But when it's worked into the content itself, it's better to just like have it be part of the content itself, the way it's described like in common language. So, excuse me, now I'd like to talk about color blindness. So there are different types of color blindness, and they vary in what colors you can or can't see, and which of those and how severe it is, right? So I have red-green color blindness. Other people have blue-yellow color blindness. Those are the two main types. But some people don't see color at all. They will see in black and white. And it's specific, color blindness is specifically a defect in the way the cone forms in development. So we have different cones in our eye that each see different wavelengths. And so my red-green cone does not see colors as well as my other cones. And so it makes it, and it's not that I don't see those colors. Some people don't see those colors. Like they will perceive red and green as like black and white, or gray, but see blue and yellow well. I can still see red and green, but they often look like other colors. Red and green get confused. Some shades of red, like bright cherry red, I can tell that's red. But if it's, I don't even know how to describe it other than like if it's a different shade or tint, it can start to look green. And even though it's red-green colorblind, it's not the only things that are affected. I also have trouble with blues and purples. Those often look similar to me. Bright yellow, like neon yellow and neon green, I have a hard time distinguishing between, as well as pinks and grays. Same with greens and browns. So it's quite a few colors. So here's a good example, right? On the right, I can tell that's a 4, but the dots on the left, I know there's a number in there, but I cannot see it because of the colors used. It just looks like a bunch of dots. But somebody who has a different type of color blindness would be able to see the left that I can't, but not be able to see the right that I can. And somebody who, for example, sees in black and white because of the values of these dots would not be able to see a number in either of them. So when using color, don't color code important information unless there is another way to distinguish it, right? Because otherwise, if you say, go to the sections in red, and I can't tell which sections are red or green, that's going to be a problem. I'm not going to know what you're referring to, which is why I don't like it that they use red and green for on and off on appliances and electronics, because often I won't be able to tell if it's on or off just by the light. Additionally, screen readers don't pick up on color. So if somebody's using a screen reader, it will just read the text as normal. There won't be any extra information given to the person using a screen reader for them to tell that something is in color. Now you can still use it to distinguish between different elements, right? Color coding is still something that's helpful for people who can see all the colors and distinguish them perfectly well. But you always want something like an icon or emblem or explanatory text or something. Color just cannot be used to convey information alone. And when using colors, there are specific colors that you shouldn't use together, right? You want strong strong contrast, because for a number of reasons. For starters, bad contrast is hard to read, especially for people with visual disabilities. Additionally, if you use colors that someone like me who is colorblind can't distinguish between, I will either barely be able to see the text or be unable to tell that there's text at all. And so you want to have at least a ratio of 4.5 to 1 for body text. The ratio is a bit lower when you're for like a big title, but it's still good to do that. So for example, these are all bad, right? And even people with perfectly normal, healthy vision will probably say the two on the left here are very like uncomfortable. They're hard to read. They don't look good. Where someone like me, who does have some visual disabilities, but not as bad as somebody who is blind or I mean, like partially blind, or only has peripheral vision, or has a different type of color blindness, I can see these, but other people may not be able to. These are all good examples, and you can tell it's usually a very dark color on a very light background, or a very light color on a very dark background. And when in doubt, often just use black and white, right? That's going to be the biggest contrast you can. And if you're just typing in white on black or black on white, you know that it's going to be readable. And a good tool I use is the WebM Color Contrast Checker. As a graphic designer, I use this all the time to make sure that everybody, regardless of how they can see, as long as they're sighted, should be able to read this. So here you can put in a hex value, which is essentially a code that tells you what color the computer will then display. Now, if you don't know the color code, what you can do is click on this thing right here and just click wherever you need to. If you have two screens or bring up a smaller screen with something else, you can click on it and it'll tell you what the color is. And so now it's updated. And I know that this color on white is not accessible, right? The contrast ratio is lower than 4.5, and it will tell you whether or not it passes for normal or large text. You can drag the sliders here. I find this tool to be very helpful. And if you find a contrast, like if I adjust it, I'm like, okay, I like that. You can then grab this and put it into code or editing software or something to make it easier for you to grab that color. So I highly recommend using this tool. I use it all the time and I find it very helpful. So 1 second, let me get a drink. Screen readers. Screen readers, I've mentioned them a couple times, but just a simple explanation is they use a speech synthesizer, so like a robotic voice, to audibly recreate a website for those who can't see. They read from left to right, and they use the HTML, the code that makes up websites or documents, to identify different elements, like lists, headers, and tables. Images as well. I will, just for the sake of time, if we have time, I will play this later, but for now I'm going to go through it just to make sure I don't run out of time. So when you're working with images, they should have a purpose and be relevant, right? It shouldn't just be like a cute image that's like sort of, has to do with biology or something. It should have purpose and be relevant to the surrounding content. That way, one, that lowers remediation. That's less things you need to create alt text for. And two, it just makes your page cleaner, easier to read, with less distractions for someone with ADHD who gets distracted easily. And if you put like a picture of a monkey in there, I'm just going to stare at that because monkeys are funny. They're like little people. Instead of focusing on the content. It also just makes it easier for people to find exactly what they need when using a screen reader. It's less stuff to jump through to find. Images must have alt text, which means they need to have a description. Alt text is you tag an image with alt text that provides a description that will read out loud with a screen reader. A screen reader will read it out loud so that people know what's in the image if they can't see it. And I use EdPlus's image accessibility generator. It's very helpful. I'm not going to fully demo it because it takes a little bit. But essentially, what you can do is just drag and drop an image or select a file from your computer, and it will create two descriptions, a long one and a short one. Now, most of the time, you want to use a short alt text, short and descriptive. Now, sometimes you will want to use the long description if it's something like a diagram or a graph or something that necessitates explanation of different parameters or values in order to understand the image. But if you just have a picture of like someone typing on a computer, you can just say image of someone typing on a laptop, or not image of, don't use image of because the screen reader will already say it's image. Just say person typing on a laptop in a library. So that's often enough to describe the image. If it's functional, like for example, if you have an image that when you click on it, it takes you somewhere, describe that function. That way people using screen readers will know if they select it, click on it, it will do something. Otherwise, they'll just think it's an image. And if it's just for visual appeal, not relevant to the content, Mark it as decorative. What that does is it makes it so screen readers will skip that bit of information. A good example of this is like banners on the banners in Canvas courses. Those are not, they make the course look pretty. They say the title, they've got a neat little image, but they're not relevant to the actual content aside from the fact that it's part of the course and it says the course name. They're there to just make it look pretty. Those are decorative and it's okay for screen readers to skip them. So if you mark it as decorative, you don't need alt text. Next, we have video and audio. When you're using videos, videos must be captioned. I've included a document here that my coworker Dan in the CTL has created in order for you to go through guides for Canvas Studio. But the captions allow people to captions aren't just transcribing what is said, but also what is on screen. If there's B-roll or any images, the captions also describe what those are. So people who can't see can still see, oh, there's a graph on screen. This is what's in the graph. Don't use flashing images or strobe-like effects. Those can cause people with epilepsy to have seizures, and seizures are not good. Minimize background noise and visual distractions. For people like me who have ADHD, if I notice something in the background, I will look at that and watch it and zone out and not be able to focus on the content. So often, a clean room, minimal clutter, minimal distractions, those are the best types of videos for people who have a hard time focusing. Speak at a consistent volume and pace. People who cannot hear or have difficulty hearing often rely on lip reading. And the faster you speak, the harder it is for someone to lip read what you're saying. The consistent volume is for people who are hard of hearing. You want to speak audibly, you want to project and not dip lower in your volume so that people can hear. Also, the slower pace gives students who may take longer for them to process information, time to process as you're speaking. Keep videos on the shorter side. Studies have shown that shorter videos actually lead to better student understanding and performance. It's just less information because if you remember what I'm talking about, that sort of overloaded, overwhelmed sort of shutdown that people with autism can experience, that often comes from long lectures without breaks or long videos that longer videos and content that make it harder to focus. If you're on screen, make sure your face is well lit for people who lip read, and any on-screen text should follow the same accessibility rules as your other content. So, using readable fonts, making sure that there's color contrast, all that still applies to video. When using tables, now tables can create issues, especially when they're used for formatting purposes. They should not be used. Yes?
I'm so sorry. Before we go into tables, there was a question asked a little bit earlier about images. So I thought maybe let me ask it just so that we can go back.
Yeah, go for it.
And it was about images more than video and audio. The question was, if the image has math on it for illustration purposes, remove the image entirely and have to make it readable, ? So I guess what would you say for alt text if the image has math on it for illustration purposes?
I mean, if it's an equation or something like that, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, try not to use an image for that. That way screen readers can read it. Because if you're using an image, right, you're gonna have to type out that equation anyway for alt text. And while I don't know a ton about making equations accessible, I do know where you can find it. MCLI has a great series of trainings on accessibility, and one of them is specifically on equations in mathematical context. I can send you a link to that after this if you are interested.
Thank you, Jake.
You're welcome. Were there any other questions, or should I continue?
That is it at the moment.
Okie dokie. So tables, don't use them for formatting. And I have been bad about this in the past before I learned about accessibility myself, because tables are great for formatting. And for example, in my web design class, a lot of early websites and beginner web design uses tables to format websites, and Canvas uses HTML as well. So that's another way you can use it, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work for that is because of screen readers. Screen readers always interpret tables as if they're being used for data. So only use tables for data. Make sure you left align the text for better readability. Add padding for visual separation between 5 and 10 pixels is usually good, but just use your intuition. Make sure it's just not up against like the walls of the table. Make sure you add a caption and headers. That way, screen reader or even sighted people too will know what this information is about. So I'll play this video in a second, but right now, here are two examples of bad or good and a bad table. This here is a good table, right? You've got your caption, which tells you exactly what this is about. You've got a header, which is going to be the top row that lets you know what each column. Sometimes you've got headers on the side with that talk about what each row does, but this tells you what the lower columns actually contain. And this is padding. The space in between the cell is what this is called of the table. Each of these individual areas is called a cell. The padding just makes it so that the letters are not right up against the wall of it, which makes it hard to read. So this would be a bad table, right? If you stare at it and read it, you can kind of figure out what it's trying to say, but because there's no header, it doesn't tell you what it is. It doesn't tell you what each of the lines are. Without header, there's no caption, so you don't know what the whole table is about. And you can see this is center aligned. There's often not much space. And that just makes it harder to read for people with visual disabilities. And it makes it really frustrating for screen readers as well. And I want to show a bit of a video. This video will is somebody demoing a screen reader, and it will show you exactly what it looks like for somebody who is using it.
Going to move to a table.
Can you hear it now?
We do. Thank
Awesome. Thanks so much.
FDA approved medications, table, 3 columns, 5 rows, FDA approved medications,
So
table.
the table is pretty self-explanatory, and I'm going to move into the table.
Medicine, approved, column 2 of 3.
And then if I go down into the
Row,
table,
medicine, tolbutamide,
and as I
column
move
1 of 3.
across,
Approved, 1975, column 2 of 3.
we're getting the labels for the column headers and row headers. So it's important when programming tables, forms, and other elements on the web pages to use the proper HTML codes. I'll go to the
Table 3 columns,
second table on the page,
medicine, row 2 of 5, tolbutamide,
and as I'm in the
Tolbutamide.
table, I move across it.
row, November 1995.
I get a date, but I don't know what that date is associated with. So it's important, as I was saying, to include proper coding tags for all these elements. These are just
All right. So I hope that helps show you what it's like for someone who uses a screen reader. And you get kind of a bit of a visual. That whole video is very good, and it's linked in the PowerPoint that I'm using, or I guess Google Slides. I will send it out through email to all of you, so you can access all of the links I've put in here and view it on your own time. But for the sake of time, we'll just watch that bit of it. So next, let's talk about styles. Styles are predefined formatting settings within your text editor or LMS, right? So if you've heard of things like headers, like heading 1, heading 2, title, stuff like that, those are all styles. They also control font size, color, and spacing. And what's really helpful about styles is they allow screen readers to jump around the page, right? Heading 1 is going to be like your title, your most important heading. Heading 2 is going to be sections. Heading 3 is subheadings, right? And what that allows is somebody on a screen reader to kind of use it as a table of contents, right? So whereas if we're reviewing our notes for a class and we want to go to a specific section, we can scroll through until we see that section. Someone who is not sighted cannot do that. So what they do is jump between the headings. So if they need to find, they know what document it is because of heading 1, and they can jump between heading 2s to find different sections. And when they're there, then they can have the screen reader read the text in there. So that makes it easier for them. So they don't have to listen to the screen reader say the entire page or document just to find one little area. So as I was talking about headings, heading 1 is going to be your document or page title. Heading 2 is your major headings. Heading 3 is subheadings. 4 is subheadings. Heading 5, subheadings, right? Now they give the document structure and help organize the page, even for people who are not disabled in any way. They just make it easier to read, and they apply similar styles. Don't use double lines for spacing. I don't mean double spaced. You can definitely use double spaced text in your document, but don't hit enter a bunch of times, because what happens is a screen reader will just read out blank, blank, blank for each line. Use built-in numbered and unnumbered lists to make lists. That way screen readers will read out list, item 1, item 2. That way they know it's a list instead of just a bunch of lines put together. Don't make them manually, because once again, making it manually requires putting in a bunch of enters, hitting enter a bunch, which adds blank, blank, blank between every line. And use built-in indentation style. Don't add a bunch of spaces or hit tab a bunch of times, because that will often read as blank, blank, empty. Every screen reader is a bit different, but that will also, instead of reading it as just an indentation, it will read it out as that. So putting all this together, along with, sorry, lost train of thought again. Here are some examples, putting all this stuff together. So a bad example would be this, right? You've got a bunch of different font sizes together. A lot of the time, some paragraphs are spaced out, some are not. All of this makes it harder to read. The use smaller text, infrequent text sizing, the use of italics, those all make it hard. And it's not easy to find, especially if you have a bunch of pages that all look like this. A good example would be like this, right? You've got a title, you have subheadings, you have subheadings. This makes it easier for screen readers to jump around. And for someone like me who gets overwhelmed very easily, having sections, shorter sections, cleaner font with, larger font, it's cleaner, it's better organized. That just makes it so people like me get overwhelmed super easily, will not experience that sort of overwhelm, especially when you're trying to find something and you're like, I don't want to read this whole thing again. I just want to find a specific part. Good organization makes it easier to find stuff. And you'll notice what's awesome about Google Docs is if you use the built-in styling, like heading 1, heading 2, it will appear on the side. So you can actually just click around here, which funny enough is very similar to how a screen reader would work. But instead of using an optical mouse like we do, they would use the keyboard and read those words out loud. Additionally, when you're styling this, in Google Docs, you can just find it up here, right? So each of these headings, you want to stay away from title, which you think, yes, I want to use the title as the title of the document, but heading 1 should really be used as the title of the document. For some reason, title just isn't picked up by a lot of screen readers. I don't know why Google has added it in here for headings, because it's often also not in other sections. So stick to the headings, right? That way screen readers will pick up on it. It also helps with consistent styling, right? All heading 2s are going to look the same. All heading 1s are going to look the same. All heading 3s are going to look the same. And it just makes it easier to visually distinguish different parts of your content. And here you've got a list, which you use by using the built-in list options, right? That way, because if you look at the bad one, it's just dashes and a bunch of lines. So this won't be read as list. For people who can't see it, it'll be read as dash and then lorem ipsum, right? Of course, you probably wouldn't make a list of all the same thing, but this is just using dummy text to illustrate it. And here's some resources. These are the micro MCLI's courses that I was talking about. One of them is the, whatchamacallit? One of them is the training on mathematical equations I was talking about. SCC has some great panorama guides to help you navigate that. EMCC has a Title II website with a bunch of resources and information on it. This is the image accessibility creator I was talking about. Here in the EMCC CTL, we've created Canvas studio guides for captioning your videos. And this is the color contrast checker I showed you. And this here is just the video we talked about. So if you want more information and more help, we have general purpose office hours every Thursday from around 10 to 1, where you can book it with Najma, and it's very general purpose. It's a just one-on-one sort of meeting, and she can try and help you. We also have just walk-in hours. If you just walk in every Thursday from 10 to 1, we will try and help you to the best of our ability. We've set aside that time when at least one person on the team is available to help you out with that. And if you want help specifically with AV, right, videos and audio, our expert here is Dan Reichstein, and you can book office hours with him on Tuesdays from 2 to 3:30 and Wednesdays from 2 to 3:30, as well as Fridays from 9 to 12. If you have any specific questions and you're not able to come in, you can shoot us an email at our CTL help desk, which is just ctl@estrellamountain.edu, or you can submit Title II questions on this form and we will get back to you and answer them. So that concludes the information section. If you have any questions, let me know and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Additionally, just for quality assurance, if you could fill out a feedback survey and let me know if there's anything you would like. If we give this training again, which we will next semester, if there's anything that you feel I didn't cover or you want more clarification on, as well as if this time worked or a different time would be better, this helps us improve our trainings. So if you could fill that out, I would be very grateful. So yeah, any questions?
So there was just a couple of things in the chat. One was ChatGPT satisfy the need for accessibility. Pages in Canvas get pretty boring looking, so decorative images helps and banners. So going back to adding images to make it more attractive, is that okay? So Jake, do you want to take that one? I tried to say that ChatGPT or any other is not 100% accessibility proof. But a lot of the things that Jake went over, like in terms of color contrast and headings, and a lot of that is related to how you can do like another check, right? To make sure that it is meeting those standards. But Jake, go for it. You can take it from there.
Yeah, if it's purely just to make it look pretty, just mark it as decorative. That way, screen readers will know to skip it if it has nothing to do with the context of the course. If you do want to add images to make it more attractive and it has something to do with the course, just make sure there's alt text on it. Right? The issue isn't necessarily images themselves, just the way they are implemented. If they don't add anything and just kind of clutter up the page, or they're not properly tagged with alt text.
And then just another question was, if you have a Canvas page that includes PowerPoint, is that accessible? And I did provide just the recording for making your PowerPoints more accessible, which was an MCLI Scottsdale CTL and EMCC CTL collaboration. But going back to a lot of the same standards that Jake went over, those are ways for us to kind of move from remediation to a more accessibility-minded content creation for students initially. But Jake, is there anything else that you would add there?
Yeah, and everything I went over still applies to PowerPoints. Inside PowerPoint, you can add alt text. You can, sorry, I just lost train of thought again. You can add alt text. You can add, what is it called? Sorry, I just totally blanked. My bad. Once again, another great example of ADHD. Yeah, you can add alt text. You can add styles like headings. All that stuff still applies in PowerPoint. Making sure font is legible. PowerPoint provides accessibility tools within it that allow you to make all that stuff. Now, I don't use PowerPoint myself, so I can't give like super specifics, but as Liz said, we do have a training recorded specifically on using PowerPoints. So no, PowerPoints are not inaccessible. They can be just as accessible as all other content. Are there any other questions?
So one question was, will the recording be posted online? It will. I just put the CTL YouTube channel. We will get it we'll get this recording closed caption and it will be posted there as a resource. You got a comment about it being helpful and introduce some people to new concepts that weren't on their radar. And there was a question about, and if something is PDF, how to gain access. Could you elaborate more on?
Yeah, I can. So PDFs, the issue is that it's not that PDFs can't be accessible, it's that making PDFs accessible can be pretty difficult. And every time you edit a PDF and save it, you then have to go in and re-tag it, which can be a bit of a nightmare. Luckily, we just got a new tool here called Grackle, which allows you to create PDFs from Google Docs and Google Sheets. And I think it works on Google Slides too, which will export it as a PDF and keep all the tags that you created in Slides, Docs, Sheets, and transfer those over to a PDF. So PDFs can be accessible. They're just very hard to make accessible and annoying because often the software we use, like Adobe Acrobat, its accessibility features haven't been updated since like the early 2000s. They're very rudimentary, difficult to use, clunky, and you have to re-edit them every time you change something.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah.
So just building a little bit about what Jake said. So PDFs, it's always best to remediate in the original source. So if you started it with a Word doc and then you created it into a PDF, easier to remediate in PDF than, into Word and then export into a PDF with that remediation already, or with those accessibility features already, than doing it after the fact. And as Jake mentioned, Grackle, you can create accessibility. It's really user-friendly, and it will look at a Google Doc, it'll look at a Google slide, and then you can export it into a PDF or a PowerPoint. And those remediation or those accessibility features should follow. So the biggest issue with PDFs is if someone else's PDF. So even if it's somebody else's PDF, you as the instructor are still responsible for ensuring that that content is accessible. So going back to if you do not have the original source document, I would say perhaps reach out to whoever has that PDF or whoever created it and see if you can get that original source document, whether it was a like a Word doc or something of that nature. That could be one strategy that you use. Or there will be some trainings at the district level on PDF remediation that we will promote once we have more information on those. Are there any other questions for Jake or related to this topic? All right. Thank you, Jake, so much. Anything you'd like to do to close us out?
No, I think I covered everything. Just fill out the feedback survey. It helps us here in the CTL. And if you have any questions that you think of after this, feel free to email me. It's just jacob.cunningham@estrellamountain.edu, or you can email the CTL help desk, ctl@estrellamountain.edu. And with that, I think that's everything.
Thank you so much, Jake. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Have a good rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.